Well, Barrow have put together two impressive playoff challenges in the last two seasons, but they've fallen at the last hurdle in both of them, missing out on both occasions on the top seven. Pete Wild, of course, was the mastermind behind those promotion challenges. He's now left over reported disagreements over budget, and possibly we could see a stylistic change now at Holker Street because Stephen Clemence is the man to replace Pete Wild. He's going to be very strong on his possession-based principles. Can it work at Holker Street? Can Barrow remain part of the promotion picture in League Two in 24-25? That's what we're going to find out in this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to the Summer Deep Dive, the latest of 72 we're doing across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. Already a few uploaded for League Two onto YouTube and Spotify, so go check those out once you're done with this one. For now, delighted to be joined by Taylor, fresh back from his holiday in Barrow, back home in Lanzarote. I think it's that way around. How are you, Taylor? Good to see you.
Yeah, good, thank you. Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, great to have you on the podcast, Taylor. I guess just sort of reflect on Pete Wild's tenure as Barrow manager, because he certainly made an impact on the club.
Yeah, definitely. Things changed tenfold when Pete Wild came into the club. As a club that had come up from the National League and struggled for 2 seasons, to then see Pete Wild come in and completely revolutionise the club, really professionalise the club, and to really kick on and move up the division, challenging for the playoffs in our first season, ultimately dropping off a little bit, and then last season really being amongst those playoffs. Unfortunately, again, missing out at the very, very end. But it shows just how much he did for the club. He's completely changed our fortunes round, and we've gone from a club that were looking like a side just fighting to stay up in the division to a side that are now aspiring to really push for playoffs, if not even more, going forward.
Yeah, I think he certainly used that word inspired. He's certainly done that. He certainly galvanised people. He's a very animated, watchable manager, isn't he? And somebody you can get behind. But I just wonder, based on the way that the last couple of months of the season went in both of Wild's seasons, do you think that actually this is a decent time to go for a change of tack and maybe go for a style that sort of saves you a bit of oxygen perhaps at certain moments?
I mean, ultimately, I think we're all disappointed that Pete Wild's moved on. Thinking in an ideal world, we would have ideally liked to have seen him continue on and really push on and hopefully finish what he started here, and really push on. Ultimately, that's not going to be the case. We've now moved on. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things fare. Obviously, we've now adopted the head coach role rather than the manager role, so that's going to be interesting to see how that one works out. And obviously, Stephen Clemence has done. I think he did a fair job at Gillingham. I think he was slightly hard done by in the end. Sort of looking at a few comments made by Gillingham fans, and a lot seem to echo that sentiment. So that makes me think that, you know, we have a man that can do a good job here, and the board have been very honest that they had a shortlist in mind, and they've found that man. They had him on the shortlist for a while in case Wild did ultimately move on in whatever circumstances they were. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And I think, like you said, it is an opportunity to breathe new life into the club. And hopefully that is exactly what will happen. Something positive will come of this, and we'll hopefully move up the division rather than revert back to where we were maybe over 12 months ago.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Stephen Clemence there, and yeah, didn't work out for him at Gillingham as he would have hoped. I think it's always difficult for a manager to implement their ideas in season, whereas I think a big advantage Stephen Clemence is going to have at Barrow is that he has got a full pre-season to work with the players and get some of his ideas across in a longer form way, which I always feel for managers coming in season, you want to introduce some of your ideas, but also you've got to get results with what you've got, and there's a very short time train to prepare players for matches is obviously different in pre-season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. I think that was largely his problem at Gillingham. He never had the opportunity to really bring in his own players, so he's not going to have that problem here. He's going to have the opportunities to work with the sporting director here and really try and target players that are going to work to his strengths and really mould a squad that is going to work for him. And then we're hopefully going to see great results from that. I think if you're able to do a reasonably good job with tools that aren't necessarily your own, like he did at Gillingham, I think that's a good start to show that he has got the abilities to really work. So if he has the right tools to work for him, all I can hope is that things are going to be even better here for us, and he'll really galvanise the squad and really push on forward for us as a club.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can do that. I'm having a look at the squad here, and in terms of who's under contract, you've obviously brought in Tiyate, who's a young forward from Premier League Academy. But I'm thinking, are we looking at about another 10 additions to the squad at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's got to be a large number of players brought in between now and the beginning of the season. We've seen quite a few leave, been released this season. So we've got to try and sort of get those numbers bolstered back up again. I think last season we were in a position where prior to the season before, we had a lot more strength in numbers. We had a little bit more depth than what we did previously. Again, at times I still think that we lacked maybe one or two, but we had a lot more strength in numbers compared to the season before that allowed us to really push on and go for those playoffs more than we did the season prior. So hopefully we'll bolster those numbers up. We'll get them in early so that they've got a pre-season under the belt working with the squad. The last thing you want is players coming in late and not really having that time to gel during pre-season. So hopefully things are going on behind the scenes where these players that are starting to come in now, conversations are being had, and we can try and get these players in so that going in early will allow us the best possible start to the season and really get the ball rolling from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got Paul Farman under contract in terms of the goalkeeping spot. Are you happy with him as the number one? And is it a case of just bringing in a deputy, or do you feel like you've got to bring in someone who can really push Paul and fight for that number one spot?
I think Farman's one of the best keepers in the division. I think he proved that last season. One of the most clean sheets in the division. I think he's really improved season upon season. Always dependable. Naturally, you're going to have the odd mistake. It's League Two. Not everybody in this division is the finished article. There are going to be the odd mistakes, but I think overall Farman is dependable and a real leader at the back. Very vocal and a fantastic goalkeeper. And I think we brought in Will Stanway from Chester as a more than suitable backup. I know there were a lot of clubs looking at him higher up the pyramid. So this is a fantastic signing for us. Obviously a local lad as well, which is something that every club wants, someone that represents the club and represents where they come from. So it's fantastic to see the second Barrovian added to the ranks. Obviously Elliot Newby being the first. So I think he's more than a dependable backup. And I think the idea with this is that he will be the backup this season, and then Farman will probably move on next season, and we'll see Stanway then be able to step up very comfortably to be that replacement for him. So I think we've in my estimations, I think we might have two of the best sort of keepers in the division in terms of having a more than a depth backup, and far more than we have for a very long time. I don't think we've had that backup for a while. So it's great to see that we got that now.
Yeah, and very encouraging as well from the point of view of Iain Wood and the fact that there's a succession plan in place, and you're almost thinking one summer ahead. That's quite a sort of that's quite a fun thing. Just wanted to touch one more thing on Paul Farman before we move on. What do you think of him from a distribution standpoint? Because last season maybe didn't matter quite as much because the style was so much geared around what he did out of possession. Do you think his distribution is good enough to embrace this new style of football that we're going to be seeing from Stephen Clemence?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think Farman, typically he'll go for the long ball. It's rare that you ever see us work it out from the back. So it'll be interesting to see whether that continues. Because a lot of the time, Farman's got a great keeper in terms of getting the ball forward. He's got a mighty kick on him. But a lot of the time it'll go to nobody. So it'll be interesting to see if we do try and do something new and start working it out from the back, or if we're going to try and use Farman's strong kick and hopefully get someone that's able to bring the ball down and actually try and make use of it rather than basically just giving the other team possession.
Yeah, well, I mean, even Manchester City sometimes go with a longer kick. They sort of mix it up, and then if the opposing teams come onto them, they can sort of go over. So maybe that might be the sort of thing that that Barrow look at. Slightly different, slightly different levels of ability, obviously. But I wanted to come to the formation, because last season it was very much a 3-5-2 for Barrow, Taylor. I'm imagining, actually, and I think a few people seem to think this on the forum, that Stephen Clemence is going to go for a back four. So obviously that's going to influence how you recruit, certainly in the right back position.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think a new style will be welcome. I think just at times towards the back end of the season, a lot of fans were getting frustrated with just the same old, really. Obviously, it was a fantastic season and no one doubts that at all. But just to see how we sort of whittled off towards the end was hugely disappointing. So I think, as much as obviously, like I've said, Wild is a huge loss for us, it'll be interesting to see a new style of football implemented, and hopefully it'll be exciting to watch and it'll get people invested, and hopefully the results will come from that as well. But it's been a while since we've seen sort of a back four implemented. Obviously, we've used wing backs for God knows how long, so it'll be interesting to see maybe someone, a right back and a left back, that are a bit more defence-minded, defence approach first. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see something different, and let's see how that works out.
Yeah, well, hopefully you can bring in the right backs you need, because that does look like an area that you're going to need to strengthen. Likewise, centre half, where the only centre half, according to my notes, that you've got is Niall Canavan. Canavan's obviously a very experienced defender at this level. He's won promotion before with Scunthorpe and Plymouth Argyle. But I feel like you're going to need to add another quick defender in there, I would imagine, possibly a Premier League.
Yeah, so I think we do need a bit more pace at the back. I think a lot of the time last season, when we had the back three of Chester, Ray and Canavan, there was a huge lack of pace. And three fantastic defenders, but a bit of pace, and someone that was able to bring the ball out from the back, someone that's a bit more composed on the ball. I think we often saw with those three, in particular Ray, that was, I think, the defender of the three that did try and come out a little bit more. He just seemed very Bambi on ice at times, where you'd get to a certain point, it was like, oh, I've got this far up the pitch, I need to move the ball on now. And I think hopefully we'll find someone that's a bit more composed on the ball, a bit quicker, who, if he does make a mistake, he can quickly get back, rectify that. It'll be interesting to see, because I think Canavan, fantastic defender, but very, very no-nonsense sort of defender. So I think he would work alongside someone who is a bit quicker, a bit more composed on the ball, and that would they'd work together well in my estimations. So I think that might be how we go, because I think the reason that George Ray was possibly released is because we are looking for that sort of defender. So that's how I think. So it'll be interesting to see if that does come to fruition, and if that does indeed happen, as I think that was the idea behind his release, because he was a fantastic player last season. and probably one of the better players within the starting 11.
Yeah, I'm thinking with the volume of defenders that you're going to need, maybe a right back who can also play centre back will be in the sort of recruitment mix. So you've got players who can cover multiple positions. I'm thinking that could be quite a valuable thing. Moving on to the left back spot, then you've got Junior Chenza, who came through the academy at Millwall, and then Mazik Agungbo, who came through at Arsenal but hasn't quite translated that pedigree into league football just yet. You happy with those two as left back options?
I think Tiencio looked fantastic when he started the season. Unfortunately, he ended up with a serious injury that ruled him out for the rest of the season. And he was due to come back towards the end, but apparently there were a few fallings out with Wild at the time. So I think a few thought that would then see the release of him, but it looks like he's going to stay on. And hopefully he will show what he did in the early stage of the last season and be a very, very good defender. Because, like I say, he took to League Two football like a duck to water. He was fantastic. Such a young player to really step up from the National League. Because he's come from lower league football very, very quickly and really rose up the ranks. So he's done tremendously well. But my only worry is that obviously he's had such a serious injury at such a young part of his career. So hopefully he'll be able to kick on and not let that affect him too much. With Agungbo, we didn't see too much of him last season. What we did see, tough to say because we didn't see enough of him. But I was a bit 50-50 with him. But you can't really judge a player when you're only seeing glimpses of them and they're not having a little bit of a run under the 11. So if they're only playing the odd few minutes and starting 1 minute and then back on the bench and then playing again in 5 games time, they're not getting that consistent run to really see what they're about. So I can't have too much judgment on Agungbo at the moment, but I think perhaps it might be an area that we'll look to bring someone in.
I think but then you'd have 3 left backs. That's the thing. So are you able to leave someone out, or
whether Agungbo can be that centre back option? Is something that we might consider. Is possibly what might work there. But it remains to be seen. We'll see what happens with that.
Of course, yeah. Well, if you can play multiple positions, that's certainly going to help. And then I'm coming to the midfield options, which in terms of first 11 quality, not necessarily depth, because if it's 4-3-3, you've only got 3 central midfielders there. But Dean Campbell, Cian Spence and Robbie Gotts, I think that's one of the better midfield trios in the league, possibly. So excited to see what those 3 can do under maybe a different style of football.
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, we've got to ensure that we keep hold of Campbell and Spence, really, because both of them last season were tremendous. Spence was my player of the season. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Again, similar to Tiencio, the way he stepped up from National League football into League Two and just flourished was brilliant. Some of the goals he scored last season as well, absolutely fantastic. Just such a good player on the ball. A huge fan of him, and we've got to ensure that we keep hold of him. And Campbell again, very assured player. Unfortunately, I think he dropped off towards the back end of the season when a lot of the players and results seemed to start dwindling a little bit. I think he was one of the players where you sort of looked at him the most and gone, "Oh, your performances have really dropped off." So hopefully he can really pick up from the early parts of last season and find that form again, rather than sort of how he ended the season, where he just looked a bit nervous. I think with everything going on, I think he looked possibly the most nervous and affected by sort of how the results were going out with everybody. And obviously Gotts has been with us for a while now, and we know what we've got with him. Very good player. I think there's still elements.
Running, isn't he, Robbie Gotts?
Yeah, you know that you're going to get running. He won't ever stop. He'll run, get himself about. Still elements to his game where I think he can be better. I think he's still not the finished article. He's still a very young player as well. So it'll be interesting to see if we see the best out of him again this season, because at times he's sort of dropped out the squad and come back in, and so whether he's going to be a consistent starter again this season, again, remains to be seen. It'll be interesting to see if those three do happen to be the three that start, because like you said, I think they could possibly be three of the better midfielders in the division as a whole, as a collective. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, he can keep hold of Campbell and Spence, because what I like about that trio is that there's not one orthodox holding midfielder. You wouldn't say there's an orthodox number 10. So if you put them together, they can interchange duties quite nicely. And I think that keeps opposing sides guessing, as opposed to having two defensive midfielders and one number 10, where you keep the number 10 quiet and then you snooker the opposition. I think those three midfielders give you that bit of unpredictability as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with that. I think possibly out of the three, if I had to say there was a more defence approach first sort of player, it would be Campbell. But especially with Gotts and Spence, they can interchange and be that number 10 or the number 8 or whatever. So I think, especially with them two, that is exactly what they bring to the table. Whereas Campbell, again, could be that player. Absolutely, not saying that whatsoever, but he would typically be the more deep lying playmaker, sort of getting the ball, spraying it out. But especially with Gotts and Spence, like you said, they can be interchangeable and really keep the opposition guessing.
Yeah, hopefully you can do that. And then moving on to those more attacking positions. David Worrell played as a wing-back last season, and obviously it's something that's not unfamiliar to him because he plays a wing-back under Darrell Clarke for Port Vale. But I'm wondering actually if maybe a more advanced role where he doesn't have as much defensive duties, and combined with this style of play that we've seen from Stephen Clemence, do you think we're going to see more productivity from David Worrell under these circumstances?
I think so, yeah. I think he'll be allowed to push on forward a little bit more if the four at the back does sort of materialise, and that is what they go ahead with. I think Worrell was unfortunate last season. We never really got to see much of him. Just injuries and various different things keeping him out of the squad. But I think at the very last game of the season against Mansfield, we really saw what Worrell can be about, and I thought he was one of the best players on the pitch that day. And it was like, this is what I'm about. Let's see what happens next season. And I think, irrespective of how old he is now, because he is sort of coming towards the end of his career, age-wise now, I still think he's got more than enough in the tank to be a really dependable, attacking, creative player for us. Because we have seen it, we saw it at times last season, just not often enough due to injuries and various other factors. So I think he can really, if allowed the opportunity to push on forward a little bit more, be that sort of player that can whip the balls in. And when we've got a player like Emile Aqua in the box, can really put a good cross into him and allow Aqua to really attack the ball. And I think that is what we might see a little bit more next season. Should, obviously, like I say, that four at the back materialise and Worrell is allowed to be that more attacking-minded player that he can be.
Do you know what? You mentioned Emile Aqua there, Taylor, and I'm just wondering, Cole Stockton obviously probably scored more goals than Aqua after he came in on loan from Burton Albion in January. But if I think of who makes Barrow a better team, I would probably say it was more Emile Aqua in terms of that work rate that he brings, the physicality. I thought he was probably one of your signings of last season. So will he feel like he probably deserves more starts?
Yeah, I think Aqua is an interesting player. I think it depends who you ask in the fan base of what people think about Emile. For me,
also they can't explain.
For me, I like Emile. I think he's a very good player, and I think he does bring something very different to the likes of Telford and even Stockton and players like that. I think he brought something very different, and he was coming up with some very important goals at important moments. And that's all. If you can have that player that is going to get you goals in important moments like that, that is what you want. Of course, there were times where he went on little droughts last season, probably not helped by the fact that there was chopping and changing in the front two constantly, and he'd find himself on the bench one week and then playing 60 minutes with the next, and I don't think that particularly helped him. But I think, like I say, he's a different player, and I think he came up with goals in important moments, and I think next season can be a real important season for Emil's progression. He's had that season under his belt now, where I think he's done very well. Because it's not just about goals. Obviously, you want goals from your forwards, but I feel like he did a little bit more as well at times, which sort of went under the radar a little bit. Sometimes he can appear a little bit lazy, but I think it's not lazy. I think he's just playing in a way that allows us to do a little bit more, and it can appear that way in certain instances. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think next season we'll really see what Emil's about, provided that he's got the right player beside him and that he's given a consistent run. Because I was such an advocate of it last season. Great to see squad depth and having competition for places, but chopping and changing every 2 minutes isn't good for anybody. You want a consistent run of two strikers, if you're going to play two strikers up front, that is, which we did last season. You want a partnership to be formed, and you want a consistent run in it, not chopping and changing every 2 minutes, which I think hindered players at times. And I think Aqua has a right to be one of the two, should we obviously go with two up front next season.
I can't see you playing two up front if the midfield three stays in situ, because then you'd be looking at I suppose you could play 3-5-2. Yeah, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure Clemence will. I'm kind of thinking it might be a back four, but we'll have to see. Because I suppose you have got Dom Telford in there as well. What did you make of Telford's form and the way he facilitated, I suppose, the goal scoring form of Cole Stockton in the second half of last season?
Yeah, I think Telford last season was unfortunate. There were various moments last season where you get the ball, do 1,000,001 great things with it, then get in the goal scoring position and it'd be blocked on the line or hit the post and roll across the line, or he just didn't seem to have that look, unfortunately for him. And I think next season, if he's given that opportunity to really start and go for it, I think we're going to see the best of Telford. Because I do think that Telford can be a top League Two player, provided that he's given the opportunities and he's given the right service. And I think last season we saw glimpses of it, perhaps not enough, and that's what frustrated a lot of supporters and a lot of fans, saying we didn't have enough goals and various different things like that. But I think if he's given that service and given the right time, then Telford can be that goal scorer that everyone's crying out for. Because there's so much to his game that he can bring, and he's proven it at this level before that he can score lots of goals. So I've every hope that this can hopefully work out, and it's not going to be something where he'll move on and we'll look back and go, what could have been? Because I think this season hopefully will work out for him.
Yeah, my experience of Dom Telford is that when you put him in a team that plays with really attacking fullbacks or wingbacks, two up top, and a progressive style of play with plenty of creativity in the midfield, he can really score goals at this level. He did it with Barrow in 18-19. He did it with Newport in 21-22. So this is a centre forward that in the right circumstances can score goals, but it's whether you're willing to play a formation that is likely to get the best out of him. I think that's probably likely to happen in a front two, which would probably lean towards the 3-5-2 over the 4-3-3. So that would probably be that advantage. And then you've also brought in Kayate as well, who's supposed to be quite a highly rated forward from the PL2 scene.
Yeah, interesting one. Honestly, I do try and keep well versed in various different things and looking into like PL2 and things like that, but I can't say I've ever come across him. So
sure. Well, let's go off what's been said. So Kayate himself has said on the official website, I play anywhere across the front three, but predominantly on the left or down the middle. I'm a quick and direct player who likes to take people on 1v1. I like to make things happen and get myself on the scoreboard. So with that in mind, I would suggest that Kouyaté, based on what he said there, you're either playing him alongside Aqua or possibly Ghana in a front two, or you're playing him maybe left of a front three. Whether he would play in the middle of a front three, I don't know, because normally you want your lone striker to be a bit more of a hold-up player, whereas sounds like Kouyaté likes to run at people. Yeah, it looks like those would be the options: left of a front three, or alongside somebody like Aqua or Ghana in a front two.
Yeah, I think he's probably going to be one of these players where he's not going to necessarily be a starter, but I think he might be an option off the bench. Like I said, I'm not well versed on what I've seen from him, but the club put a little video up of all these goals that he scored whilst at Everton. Certainly what he said there lines up with what I saw watching that video. So hopefully it works out. He's a young player, so again, it's one for the future. And I think the club are sort of looking ahead now. I think the signings we've made with Stanway and Kouyaté emphasise the fact that we're not just looking at this season, we're looking forward to next season and possibly even the season after that. So there seems to be a little bit of a plan in action in place, which we saw glimpses of last season with obviously the B team coming into fruition and coming into formation. So I think we saw glimpses of that last season. So I think this is continuation of that, and we're starting to see strides being made forward, looking forward to the future rather than just constantly looking at now and what's happening now. And it's good to see that as well. So it's one that could work out now, but one especially for the future, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I do really like that it's a club that's thinking long term. I suppose with the B team, the challenge, I really like the idea of a B team, especially because I think it's a great way of potentially increasing the value in the squad and possibly blooding in players and sort of being that halfway house between academy football and first team football. The flip side of that, though, is that you end up paying for it comes out of the first team budget a little bit, having it fielding a B team, and so you can sometimes end up with Accrington Stanley had this, I think, last season. They had too many players that weren't quite at the level they needed, and you sort of go for quantity and you end up compromising a little bit on quality sometimes. So I think that can be the risk sometimes with a B team.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong with that. I think last season, especially with some of the B team players, most of them are gone, and I think that just shows that we sort of wanted to create a B team and start making strides forward to it, but it was just sort of, let's just bring some faces in and start the ball rolling and then let them go. And so hopefully now that we've sort of had that season, we're now looking at players that can possibly have an impact now, but are still more for the future. But like I said, still have that option of having an impact now. And Kouyaté, like I said, I think from the video that I saw, it's all I can possibly go off because I don't know much about him. So like I said, it's all I can really go off. But there seems to be a player there, so it'll be interesting to see, if given the opportunity, what he can do next season.
Well, let's hope he can make a difference. We've talked about sort of vision for the club and succession planning and long-term thinking, and I suppose this all leads us to Iain Wood and his importance as sporting director. Would you subscribe to the view that in losing Pete Wild, Barrow have lost the second most important person at Barrow?
Tough to say. I think obviously, first and foremost, Iain Wood has been integral to the turnaround of this club, and I think the more time has gone on, the more people have really started to hone in on that and realise the impact he has had. And I think this summer is really going to emphasise that as well. Whether Pete Wild was the second most important person, I think the next 12 months will really go a long way into seeing if that statement is true. Okay. Obviously, you read comments and things from board members and various different things where they'll say certain things, and it's like, well, you might be saying that now, but that might not be the case, and you're saying that about that person, but this, that, and the other. So
sure.
It'll be, like I said, the next 12 months will go a long way into seeing whether that statement as to whether Pete Wild was the second most influential, important person at this club is true or false. And it would be remiss of me to say yes or no at this point, I think.
Okay.
Because in the next 12 months, it'll go a long way into proving yes or no.
But I suppose no, I think that's very fair. But I suppose he seems to have Barrow's rise from a relegation struggling side into a side that's looking at the promotion places has coincided with Iain Wood's appointment. So I guess you have to give him some credit for the way he's overseen the club's sort of trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. Credit has to go to him. Again, like I said a minute ago about comments being made, the board have now come out and said Iain Wood was integral for the morale of the squad and this, that, and the other. But again, is that just to hide the fact that Wild moved on and it's a way of sort of deviating it away from his loss, and it's trying to not make out like it's a bigger deal than it perhaps actually might be. But I think we've seen enough from Iain Wood and the impact he's had, the players that he's helped to bring in, the players that he's starting to bring in this summer. I think we've seen enough to really say you deserve so much credit for what you've done. And I think his appointment was a real turnaround, and I think if there's a landmark moment and a stamp that you need to put, this is where the club turned around. I think his appointment will go a long way into being that landmark moment, similarly to Pete Wild's appointment when he came in. I think those two moments are perhaps not of equal value, but perhaps may be of equal value, or even would be in higher value. Should we see in the next 12 months' time what happens with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to tell us a lot. So, in terms of the expectations for this season, you kept your expectations last season very grounded, Taylor, probably more grounded than mine. But I think for Barrow, is it still a case of get to 50 points first and foremost? Is that still the first objective, I guess?
I think we've become more than that these days. I think we're at times last season, I still thought that we were a little bit disrespected, despite where we were in the division. I mean, I think supporters are always going to be disrespectful to certain clubs because you've not got the fan base. So little Barrow, can't believe we lost to Barrow or whatever. But I think even from managers and various people within certain clubs, we perhaps didn't get the respect we deserve. And I think we are more than just little Barrow now. I think the last two seasons have really proven that we are more than that. We're not just here to make up the numbers. We're not here just to pull 50 points and then see what happens anymore. I think we can be more than that. And I'm always very grounded in my expectations. I just never like to get over exerted and over exaggerated and feel that we're going to do this and do that and then ultimately let myself down. So I think next season will be about materialising and hopefully bedding in the squad. I think the first few months will be interesting to see what happens. I think if we get off to a good start, then that'll be fantastic. The last thing we want is to get off to a poor start and the alarm bells start ringing. But I think we will hopefully have enough about us to ensure that we can at least rival the last couple of seasons and hopefully push on. I think the division this season is, with no disrespect to anyone that's come up or come down or anything like that, I think the division this season is weaker than last season.
I agree.
And I think the fact that we were in and amongst the top seven for the entirety of last season shows that if we are able to strengthen our squad well enough, that we can continue to be up there and we can really push on. Because like I said, on paper, this is a weaker division. So if we do our part and ensure that we continue to strengthen, then we can hopefully push on. But I think the aim this season will be to aim for the top half at bare minimum, because I think that's now where we are as a football club.
So you think even if there was stylistic progress and developmental progress under Stephen Clemence, you think bottom half would be a failure of the season?
I think failure would be a strong word to use.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily say failure. I think it would be disappointing.
Okay.
Because I think we're now at a point where, like I said, we're not just little Barrow anymore. We want to push on and really prove ourselves. And I think if we were to slip into the lower half of the table, I think a lot of people would look at that and go, well, they've gone backwards, which might not be the case. You know, like you say, stylistic things might materialise, and we might look a better squad in terms of younger players have developed, and the following season might be where we really kick on. But I think if we can look at top half, then we can say that's successful. We've lost Pete Wild, but we've not gone backwards as such. We've probably stabilised and shown that losing him wasn't the end of the world, and that's what I hope will happen. But like I said, I think we've got enough of a backbone and enough of a squad with obviously additions to come, where I'm looking at it and thinking with the right additions we can really push on and hopefully again go for the playoffs. Because like I said, the league this season on paper is weaker. So like if we do our job and ensure that what we're doing strengthens the squad, then we can hopefully push on up the division and go for that top 7 and see what happens with that.
Yeah, hopefully you can do that. So with that in mind, just to condense everything that we've talked about in this podcast, Taylor, what would be the big reasons to believe that you can achieve that aspirations and maybe just manage a top 7 finish?
I think, like I said, we've got players in the squad that are more than capable of enabling this club to finish in those top 7 spots, pending that we keep hold of them, i.e. Cian Spence, Niall Canavan, Campbell, and I think we're going to see more things from Aqua and Telford this season. And we've got Farman, who, like I've said, arguably in my estimations, the best keeper or one of the best keepers in the division. And we had one of the best defensive records last season. We have lost Chester, we have lost Ray, but I think we can ensure that with the right additions, we keep that strong backbone, and then it's just a case of hopefully creating a few more chances, getting a few more goals, and that will enable us to finish in those top 7 spots. But we've got enough players in this squad where I am confident that we have the quality there. It's just seeing what happened with a new manager, which you could any manager can come into a club. You can have the highest of expectations. It can be the biggest of names, but you never know how it's going to work out until you start to see the first few results of the seasons, the first performances, and it's not until probably October time where you can then start to go, right, okay, this is how it's panning out. So there's a lot of ifs and buts, but I'm still confident enough in this squad that we can ensure that we're going to push for those top 7 places next season.
Yeah, let's hope you can do that. And then in terms of maybe what the reasons to that, I think you touched on it just there, the fact that it is a new manager, someone who has got a good coaching background working under Steve Bruce, hasn't proven himself to be successful as a number 1 in senior management. So would that be possibly the question mark, if you like, as to whether you might not achieve your ambitions this season?
Yeah, of course there's a question mark, because like I say, he comes in with the only experience have really been at Gillingham, where I think, like I've said already during this podcast, he was slightly hard done by in ways. But as much as I do say that, there's still the odd few that, you know, say that he wasn't fantastic. So with everything, you can only go off opinions, and you don't know whose opinion is more mighty than the next. And so it's all an opinion game in football. So all we can hope is that the board have made the right decision. The fact that they had a shortlist in mind, that they built on a database that they built on, and they've had him shortlisted for this length of time, will mean that they've really done the homework on him. They're very impressed with what he's said in his interview. They're impressed with what he's done at Gillingham. And that's all we can hope, is that the right decision has been made based off of the many factors that the board have clearly looked into. And it's good to see that they've really done the homework with regards to having a database of managers, whether they're at a club already or whether they're unemployed, and then really making the move based off of that. And that's all we can hope, is that the board have really done the homework and ensured that the right manager has come in, and that we're going to progress as a football club rather than go back, which I hope won't be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And then give me too early to make a prediction, I think, because we another 10 players to come into the squad. We don't know what the squad's going to look like going into the season, so I'm not going to ask you for a prediction. But give me a number between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism heading into the start of pre-season ahead of the new campaign.
At this moment in time, it'd probably be a 7. You know, I'm optimistic just based off of the quality that I know we've got in this squad, and the optimism that I've got in our sporting director and the board to bring in and facilitate the right signings. So I'm confident in that sense. But of course, there's a lot of work to be done between now and the beginning of the season. So that's purely why at the moment I can't be overly optimistic and say 8, 9, 10, because you know there's a lot of work to be done. So until we start to see that work come into fruition and start to see the foundations being laid a little bit more, then for now I can't be too optimistic. But I'm confident enough in what we've got here that we're going to make the right decisions, and next season will be one that will hopefully be a fruitful season for us, and we can really look to push on and maybe go one step further than last season.
Let's hope you can do that. A solid seven for now. Listen, Taylor, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you about Barrow this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everybody for watching at home. This has been the EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive on Barrow. We'll see you again next time.